The sun had long dipped behind the jagged horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, and the chill of evening settled deep into the bones of the weary woman trudging along the dusty road. Her clothes were threadbare, patched, in places with whatever scraps of fabric she could find, and her shoes had long since worn thin, offering little protection from the jagged stones and dry thorns underfoot. Her hair, matted and tangled, carried the scent of smoke from countless nights spent in open fields, seeking warmth where she could find it. Each step she took was heavier than the last, yet her eyes remained alert, scanning the surroundings for even the smallest sign of shelter, a place to lay her aching body for a few stolen hours of rest. She had been wandering for days, moving from town to town, avoiding the prying eyes of authority and the judgmental stares of those too busy with their own lives to notice the struggles of a wandering soul. Hunger gnawed at her stomach with an insistent ferocity, and every abandoned barn or empty shed she stumbled upon had long been picked clean by others like her. The world seemed to have no space for her, no compassion left to spare. Yet she carried on, driven by the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, there existed a place where she could be invisible but safe, hungry but not entirely forsaken. As the road curved through a valley, she glimpsed a stretch of golden fields dotted with the silhouettes of horses and cattle. In the distance, a sprawling ranch rose like a fortress against the fading light, its wooden fences gleaming faintly in the twilight. Smoke drifted lazily from a stone chimney, hinting at warmth, food, and safety, things she had almost forgotten existed. She hesitated at the edge of the property, heart pounding. She had learned to read signs, to understand that wealth often came with walls not just of wood and stone, but of pride and suspicion. Still, the pang of hunger and the ache of exhaustion pushed her forward, even as doubts clawed at her resolve. The ranch seemed alive with quiet activity, a lantern swinging. In the window of the main house, horses shifting in their stalls, a dog barking in the distance. She imagined the lives within, people with warm beds, full bellies, and laughter that did not carry the weight of despair. For a moment, a bitter pang of envy surged within her, yet she quickly pushed it aside. She was not there to covet their lives, but to survive, to find a corner to rest her tired body, and maybe, if luck allowed, a morsel to fill her stomach. Drawing a deep, shuddering breath, she stepped closer to the fence that separated her from the world of comfort and security. She crouched low, her mind racing with what little courage she had left. It was dangerous, she knew. Rich ranchers rarely welcomed strangers, especially those with dirt-smudged faces and tattered clothing. And yet, the thought of another night, sleeping under the cold, indifferent stars with only the chill of the wind and the rough earth beneath her, was unbearable. Her stomach growled loudly, echoing in the quiet evening, and she clenched her fists against her own weakness. In that moment, the woman understood the truth of her existence. She was small in the grand scheme of the world, almost invisible to the eyes of those who mattered. And yet, she also felt the spark of determination flicker inside her, fragile but stubborn. If she could find just a corner, a shadowed nook where she could rest without interruption, she could regain her strength. Perhaps tomorrow the world would not seem so merciless. Perhaps tomorrow she would be more than a wandering shadow. With careful, measured steps, she moved closer to the ranch, her eyes scanning for a place to crouch safely, ready to risk the scorn of strangers for a brief taste of rest and relief. Each step carried the weight of her hardships, yet also the faint glimmer of hope that somewhere, even at the edge of the world she knew, a moment of kindness awaited. The woman had paused at the edge of the ranch, her heart hammering like a frantic drum in her chest. She had studied the sprawling property, taking in the fences that gleamed faintly in the moonlight, the neatly arranged barns, and the main house that seemed almost to pulse with warmth and life. Every detail reminded her of what she lacked: comfort, stability, and safety, but also of the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a morsel of relief here. She knew the risks. She had encountered the harsh judgment of the wealthy. Before, their suspicion cutting sharper than any cold wind. Yet her stomach ached unbearably, and the exhaustion in her bones pressed her forward. With trembling hands, she approached the main gate. The wooden posts were tall, polished, and intimidating, and the faint sound of voices from inside made her hesitate. A pair of ranch hands were moving about near the stables, their lanterns casting long shadows across the neatly raked gravel. The woman slowed, crouching low to the ground as she surveyed the path ahead. Her pride told her to retreat, to disappear into the night and find safety elsewhere, but her hunger and fatigue spoke louder. She had to try. She had to ask. Clearing her throat softly, she stepped into the lantern light, careful not to startle the men. "Excuse me," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, hoarse from thirst and disuse. I'm sorry to bother you. I only need a bit of food, maybe a corner to rest." Her hands shook slightly as she spoke, not just from cold, but from the fear of rejection that had haunted her life for so long. The ranch hands froze, exchanging glances that conveyed doubt, suspicion, and irritation. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard, spoke first, his voice gruff. "We don't take in strays. Go on, before we call the sheriff." The words hit her like a slap, but she did not move. She knew the refusal was coming. She had faced it countless times before. Still, something in her tone, the quiet dignity beneath her fear, made the men hesitate. Another hand, younger and less hardened, shifted uncomfortably, lowering the lantern slightly. Maybe she just wants to rest for a night," he murmured, though he did not speak it with authority, only a tentative suggestion that soon faded under the first man's stern glare. The woman's heart sank, but she forced a small, hopeful smile. "I don't need much," she said softly. "Just scraps to eat and a quiet corner. I won't trouble anyone." She avoided their eyes, afraid they would see how desperately she clung to hope. She did not dare ask for comfort, only survival. And survival alone was a fragile, fleeting thing she had long ago learned to protect. The first man shook his head and muttered under his breath, walking away. The woman let out a quiet breath she hadn't realized she had been holding, but she remained at the gate. The younger man lingered, uncertain, and finally spoke again, softer this time. "Wait here, I'll see if someone can help." For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe. She stayed as still as she could, clutching the thin shawl. Around her shoulders, the lantern light flickering across her tired face. Each second stretched like an eternity, and the chill of the evening pressed against her. Yet she did not move, her eyes fixed on the warmth of the house in the distance, imagining the simple comfort of a corner to rest, a small meal to quiet the gnawing hunger. Then, in the distance, a voice called, young, clear, and curious. It belonged to the rancher's daughter. Her footsteps approached lightly, with the confidence and innocence of someone who had grown up in comfort, but had not yet learned the walls of fear and suspicion that guarded the adults around her. The woman straightened slightly, heart beating faster. Maybe, just maybe, help had arrived in the form she least expected. The woman's hope fluttered like a fragile bird in her chest as the young girl approached, her dress brushing softly against the gravel and her bright eyes wide with curiosity. For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, the woman felt a warmth that had little to do with the evening sun and more with the innocence of the child before her. Yet before she could speak, the towering figure of the rancher appeared behind the girl, his face stern and unyielding, shadowed by the lantern light. "What is this?" he barked, his voice carrying the authority of years of control over his land and household. "Who are you?" And what are you doing here?" The woman's voice caught in her throat. She tried to speak, tried to explain her desperate need, but the words faltered, twisted by fear. I only seek a corner and a bit of food," she managed to whisper, lowering her gaze to the ground in deference. She did not dare to meet his eyes, knowing that wealth and power often met humility with suspicion rather than mercy. "I won't trouble anyone. I only need a place to rest for the night." The rancher's eyes narrowed, sharp and unyielding. He studied her tattered clothes, dirt-streaked face, and worn shoes, and saw not a human in need, but a potential problem, a disruption to the order of his carefully managed world. "This is no place for wandering strangers," he said firmly. "You will leave, or I will make sure the law ensures it." His tone left no room for argument. It was the final verdict of someone used to having the last word. The woman's shoulders slumped under the weight of rejection, and a familiar ache settled deep into her chest. She had faced cold nights, hunger, and scorn before, but the sting of dismissal, especially in the presence of the young girl whose eyes reflected sympathy and curiosity, cut deeper than she expected. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that kindness might be found in unexpected places. Yet here, on the edge of a life she could barely imagine, it seemed just as elusive as it had always been. The young girl stepped forward, her voice soft but insistent. "Father, she doesn't mean any harm. She's hungry and tired." The rancher's frown deepened, his protective instincts for his daughter colliding with his distrust of outsiders. "This isn't a lesson in charity," he said harshly. "We have rules here. You'll obey them or you'll leave." The woman lowered her gaze, biting back the lump in her throat. She could feel the judgment radiating from him like heat from a forge, yet something in the girl's eyes made her pause. There was no malice there, only curiosity, empathy, and perhaps a spark of defiance against the harshness of her father's world. The woman wanted to reach out, to speak, to beg for a single chance. But pride, that stubborn and battered companion, held her silent. She turned slowly, retreating to the shadows near the barn at the edge of the property. It was not much, a dusty corner with a broken fence post to lean against, but it was shelter of a sort, and for tonight it would have to suffice. The rancher's voice echoed behind her, final and uncompromising, while the girl's small hand brushed briefly against the woman's arm in a silent promise of attention. Later, as she settled herself into the cold, rough ground, wrapping her thin shawl around her shoulders, the woman allowed herself a small sigh. Rejection was nothing new, yet the sting was sharper here, amplified by the warmth and life she had just glimpsed and had been denied. And still, beneath the layers of weariness and despair, a spark of hope lingered. The quiet understanding that even in this world of wealth and rules, there might be someone who saw her not as a burden, but as a human being worthy of care. Tonight, she would sleep in a corner, unseen and unacknowledged. But tomorrow, perhaps she would find a way to be more than invisible. Night settled over the ranch like a soft, dark blanket, muffling the sounds of the fields and quieting the livestock to gentle whispers of shuffles and snorts. The woman huddled in the corner of the barn, her back against the rough wooden wall, and drew her thin shawl tightly around her shoulders. The cold bit into her bones, but her heart carried a cautious warmth, an ember of hope sparked by the brief, silent connection with the young girl earlier. From her hidden spot, she watched the flickering lanterns of the main house, observing the quiet movements of the household. The girl moved through the halls like a delicate shadow, her curiosity apparent in the way she paused at doors and peered around corners. The woman noticed her small acts, leaving a plate slightly out of reach for the barn cat, closing a gate gently to prevent a horse from wandering, humming softly to herself. Each movement carried care, thoughtfulness, and a rare innocence that made the woman's heart ache with longing, for a life she had never known, and for the kind of trust she had once lost and feared she would never find again. The woman remained, still, careful not to make a sound, but she allowed herself to notice small details she had never seen in her years of wandering. The girl's laughter, muffled by the walls but unmistakable, rang like wind chimes in the night. The soft footfalls across polished floors, the gentle patting of a dog, and the warm glow from the lanterns made the barn feel simultaneously distant and close. For the first time in a long while, the woman felt as if she were witnessing life, from the outside rather than existing on the cold margins of it. Curiosity mingled with a sense of longing. She wondered what it would be like to be allowed inside, to move freely without fear of being chased away. Her hands itched to help, to reach out, but she knew the dangers of revealing herself too soon. Trust had to be earned slowly, cautiously. She had learned that the hard way, surviving by watching, waiting, and learning the rhythms of others before daring to intervene. The young girl, for her part, seemed aware of the woman's presence even without seeing her. She moved in small, deliberate ways near the barn, leaving scraps of bread or milk at the corner where the woman had been forced to settle. At first, the woman suspected coincidence, but as the offerings continued night after night, she realized it was intentional. The child had noticed her, had seen the quiet dignity in her exhaustion, and had chosen to act. The gesture was small, almost invisible in the grand scale of the ranch, but to the woman it was monumental, a sign that not everyone judged her for the state she was in. A new sense of cautious hope began to take root. Maybe, just maybe there, was a way for her to exist in this world without constantly hiding, without always shrinking in the shadows. The girl's gentle actions reminded her of kindness she had long forgotten, acts that cost little to give but meant everything to receive. And yet the woman knew the limits of her reality. The rancher's stern presence loomed like a silent wall, a constant reminder that any step toward trust could be dangerous. The girl's kindness was a flicker of light in the darkness, fragile and fleeting, and the woman could do nothing but observe, learn, and wait. In the quiet hours of the night, as the moon cast silvery light across the barn and fields, the woman allowed herself a small, private smile. Though her body was weary and her stomach gnawed with hunger, her spirit felt a whisper of life returning. In the simple, unnoticed gestures of the rancher's daughter, she saw the possibility of connection, of trust, and perhaps even of family. For the first time in many nights, the woman did not feel entirely invisible, and that, she realized, was the beginning. Days passed quietly at the edge of the ranch, each one blending into the next with the slow rhythm of labor and routine. The woman continued to occupy the shadowed corner of the barn, invisible to most, but she no longer felt entirely alone. The young girl's silent gestures, a plate of food left at the barn's edge, a soft knock on the wooden door, a warm smile through the slats, had opened a tiny window of trust and connection. It was fragile, delicate, but it gave the woman courage she had long thought lost. One morning, as the sun spilled gold across the fields, she noticed the barn gates slightly ajar, letting a horse wander too close to the fence line. Without thinking, she stepped out quietly, her bare feet brushing against the cool earth, and gently guided the animal back into its stall. The soft nicker of the horse and the sound of hooves settling echoed in the quiet barn, and she felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She had done something useful, something meaningful, without demanding recognition. Later that day, as she returned to her corner, she discovered a small basket of fresh bread and apples placed carefully on the hay. No note, no words, only a silent acknowledgement. She knew immediately it was from the girl. A lump rose in her throat, and for the first time in many years she allowed herself a small laugh, light and unburdened, that echoed softly against the barn walls. It was a sound that had been buried beneath layers of fear, hunger, and sorrow. Encouraged by these small tokens, the woman began to act in secret, performing quiet chores that eased the workload of the ranch hands. She swept the barn floor before anyone arrived, mended a torn blanket, and quietly carried buckets of water to the horses. Each act required caution. She knew discovery could bring harsh words, suspicion, or outright expulsion. But the feeling of usefulness, of belonging, even in the smallest measure, was intoxicating. The young girl continued to watch, sometimes openly, sometimes from a distance. She would laugh softly when she saw the woman slipping unnoticed behind the horses or tucking stray animals into the safety of the stalls. There was a silent conversation between them, conducted in glances, nods, and tiny gestures. Bread left on hay, a pat on a horse's neck, or a whispered "thank you" when no one else was looking became their secret language, bridging the gap between their vastly different worlds. One evening, the woman noticed the girl struggling to carry a heavy bucket of water across the yard. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, offering to help. "Here," she said quietly, her voice firm but gentle. Together they carried the water to the far side of the barn, their hands brushing accidentally, and a shy smile passed between them. The girl's trust had grown. She no longer feared the woman's presence. These small acts, though seemingly insignificant, began to shift something subtle in the household. The rancher's daughter learned the value of empathy, the importance of kindness without expectation, and the joy of helping someone who could not repay her. Meanwhile, the woman began to feel a faint but persistent sense of hope, a glimmer that perhaps life had more to offer than survival, that connection and care might exist even in a world that had often been cruel and indifferent. Nightfall found the woman back in her corner, a little less alone than the night before, her spirit lifted by the quiet acknowledgement of her presence. She realized that kindness, no matter how small or secret, had the power to create bonds stronger than fear, suspicion, or social barriers. And in that realization, she began to believe that her life, which had seemed defined by wandering and survival, could change in ways she had never imagined. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not by the entire world, but by one small, caring soul whose actions whispered of hope, trust, and the possibility of family. The days grew, warmer as spring edged its way into the valley, bringing with it the scent of fresh grass and blooming wildflowers. The woman continued her quiet work in the barn and around the ranch, each task performed with careful attention and humility. Yet now, something had shifted. The invisible barrier that had kept her on the outskirts of life at the ranch began to erode, replaced by small, fragile threads of connection, threads spun by patience, kindness, and mutual curiosity. The young girl became bolder, moving closer to the woman each day, sometimes lingering in the barn to watch her at work, sometimes speaking softly when she believed no one else could hear. "Why do you stay out here all alone?" she asked one afternoon, her voice tinged with genuine concern as she placed a bowl of water beside the woman's corner. The question startled the woman, though she masked it with a faint smile. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her that the simple inquiry felt almost miraculous. The woman hesitated. Trust, she had learned, could not be rushed. Yet, there was something in the girl's eyes, innocent, unwavering, and kind, that made it possible to take the first cautious step. I have nowhere else to go," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, carrying the weight of years spent wandering and hiding. "I only need a place to rest and to eat. I do not want trouble. The girl tilted her head, studying her carefully. You don't look like trouble, she said. I think you're nice. You help everyone without asking anything. That's kind. Her words were simple, but they struck deep within the woman, evoking a warmth she had nearly forgotten. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel seen, not as a beggar or an outsider, but as someone with value, someone capable of goodness. Over the following days, the two formed a quiet rhythm together. The girl would ask questions about the woman's past, carefully, as though testing the waters, while the woman answered with measured honesty, revealing fragments of her life without exposing the deepest wounds. She spoke of villages she had known, fleeting friendships, and the hardships that had shaped her, always careful to avoid the bitterness that had nearly consumed her. The girl listened intently, her eyes wide, her small hands clasped in front of her as though absorbing every word. Through these exchanges, trust began to solidify. The woman learned to anticipate the girl's kindnesses and, in turn, responded with gentle gestures. A folded blanket here, a tidy stall there, a reassuring smile when the girl fumbled with chores. Their communication became a dance of subtlety, silent nods, shared glances, and occasional whispered words that conveyed far more than either could articulate fully. The girl's innocence encouraged the woman to open her heart just a little, while the woman's resilience and quiet strength taught the girl empathy and courage. But trust is rarely built without tension, and the shadow of the rancher loomed over their growing connection. The woman remained acutely aware that her presence, if discovered fully, could provoke anger or expulsion. Yet the safety and warmth she experienced in these fleeting moments of acceptance were worth the risk. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope, not just for food or shelter, but for understanding, companionship, and perhaps the faint possibility of belonging. By the end of the week, the bond between the woman and the girl had taken root, firmly enough that small, daring gestures became natural. The girl would leave extra food deliberately, touch a stray animal in the barn with the woman by her side, or whisper secrets meant for no one else. The woman responded with quiet attentiveness, subtly guiding her, protecting her, and, in return, feeling something she had long abandoned: the joy of connection, the tentative thrill of being trusted and needed. In these moments, hidden away in the soft shadows of the barn, a fragile but profound relationship blossomed, a relationship that would ultimately challenge the walls of wealth, pride, and social expectation that governed the ranch, and one that would slowly, imperceptibly, transform both of their lives. The warmth and quiet trust between the woman and the young girl had grown stronger over the weeks, yet it could not remain hidden forever. The rancher, a man of firm routines and rigid principles, began to notice small disruptions. A gate left, slightly ajar, a broom leaning neatly in the corner, and livestock fed with unexpected care. At first, he dismissed these as coincidence, the results of diligent staff or natural order. But slowly, a suspicion began to gnaw at him, sharp and unrelenting. One afternoon, while inspecting the stables, he caught sight of the woman slipping out from the shadows with a bucket of water. She froze for an instant, and he recognized her. Immediately, the wandering stranger he had once rejected. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with the stern resolve of a man who had never tolerated disorder. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the quiet of the barn like a whip. The woman stepped back instinctively, fear flaring in her chest. I was just—" Her voice faltered under his gaze. She did not know whether to lie or tell the truth. Honesty was dangerous, yet deception could invite even harsher punishment. Before she could speak, the young girl stepped forward, her small hand gripping the woman's sleeve. "Father, she's only helping," the girl said, her voice trembling but firm. "She doesn't mean any harm." She cares for the animals. She's kind. Please don't be angry." The rancher's expression hardened. He towered. Over them both, his authority unmistakable. "Kindness does not grant permission," he said harshly. "Rules exist for a reason. You cannot simply let strangers wander through this property, teaching lessons they have no right to give. You will leave, or you will face consequences." The woman's heart sank, but she refused to back down completely. Her voice was low, steady, yet carried the weight of her dignity. "I mean no trouble. I only wish to help in any way I can. I have nowhere else to go, and I only seek a corner, a meal, and to do good where I can." The rancher's gaze shifted to his daughter, and he saw in her eyes a defiance he had not anticipated, a mixture of compassion and stubbornness that mirrored traits he had always tried to instill, yet now they worked against him. He clenched his fists, torn between authority and the unmistakable truth. The child's happiness was intertwined with this stranger's presence, however unwelcome it might seem. For a tense moment, silence hung over the barn, broken only by the quiet shuffling of the animals. The young girl's gaze never wavered, and slowly the rancher realized that the bond between them was genuine. He felt a mixture of anger, confusion, and reluctant admiration. This woman, whom he had intended to banish, had quietly demonstrated a sense of care, patience, and courage that even he could not dismiss entirely. Still, the rules of his world pressed upon him heavily. "I will not allow this to continue unchecked," he said finally, his voice a controlled growl. "You may stay, but under my conditions. No interference with my household, no wandering beyond these walls without permission, and no influence over my daughter beyond my oversight." The woman nodded silently, understanding the precarious balance she now occupied. The barn, once merely a corner for survival, had become a place of fragile acceptance. Yet the tension was palpable. Every glance from the rancher reminded her that her position was temporary and conditional. Trust, she knew, was delicate, and one misstep could undo the tenuous progress she had made. As the rancher turned and left, the young girl exhaled softly, relief mingling with lingering defiance. She looked at the woman, eyes bright. "Thank you for staying," she whispered. The woman smiled faintly, her heart heavy with both gratitude and apprehension. The bond they had nurtured faced its first true test, not against cruelty, but against caution, authority, and the rigid walls of a world that rarely welcomed outsiders. In that moment, the woman realized that surviving at the ranch would require not only patience and humility, but courage. Courage to navigate the complexities of trust, family, and unspoken expectations. The true challenge was only beginning. It was a late afternoon when the quiet rhythm of the ranch was shattered. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the fields, as a sudden commotion erupted near the stables. One of the young horses, startled by a stray gust of wind, had bolted, dragging its halter across the uneven ground. The animal thrashed wildly, threatening to injure itself or anyone who tried to intervene. The ranch hands rushed forward, shouting commands, but the chaos only seemed to make matters worse. The young girl, who had been playing nearby, froze in terror, her small hands clenching the hem of her dress. The woman, who had been tending to the barn's corner quietly, saw the danger immediately. Without hesitation, she sprang into action. Years of survival on the streets had honed her instincts, and she moved with a precision and calmness born from necessity. She approached the panicked horse slowly, speaking in a soft, steady voice, her hands outstretched to convey reassurance rather than fear. "Easy. Easy now," she murmured, her tone gentle but firm. The horse's wild eyes flicked toward her, the tension in its muscles gradually easing under the unexpected presence of someone who seemed to understand its fear. She guided the animal with skill, positioning herself to prevent it from bolting further into the fence or trampling the young girl, who now clung nervously to a nearby post. The rancher arrived at the scene moments later, witnessing the woman's quiet courage. He watched as she coaxed the horse into a calmer state, her hands steady as she adjusted the halter and led it back to its stall. The ranch hands, previously frantic, stepped back, astonished by the composure and expertise she displayed. For a brief, suspended moment, all eyes were on her. The woman they had dismissed, the stranger they had questioned. Once the horse was secure, the woman turned to the young girl, checking that she was unharmed. The girl's eyes shone with admiration and relief, and she threw her arms around the woman instinctively. "Thank you. You saved him," she exclaimed, her voice full of awe. The rancher, usually stoic and reserved, felt a stirring he could not ignore. Here was someone who, without seeking reward or recognition, had risked herself to protect his daughter and his property. He saw the quiet strength and bravery that went beyond social status or wealth, a quality he respected, even if it unsettled him. "Enough," he said finally, his voice low but commanding. The commotion faded as the ranch hands returned to their routines, glancing back at the woman with newfound respect. The rancher approached her, studying her closely. "You have skills, courage, and a heart I did not expect," he admitted reluctantly. "Perhaps I misjudged you." The young girl squeezed the woman's hand, beaming with trust and gratitude. The woman felt a surge of something she had not experienced in years: validation, acceptance, and the faintest hint of belonging. She had not only survived another day, but had proven that her presence mattered, that her actions could inspire trust and admiration even in those initially skeptical of her. That evening, as the Yageu sun dipped below the horizon and the ranch settled into quiet once more, the woman returned to her barn corner, but something had shifted. She was no longer merely tolerated. She had earned a measure of respect and acknowledgement that could not be taken away. The young girl's eyes bright with admiration, and the rancher's thoughtful glance had altered the landscape of her life. For the first time, the woman realized that her place at the ranch, her safety, her acceptance, and perhaps even a sense of home, was no longer entirely beyond reach. The turning point had come, not through pleading or timid submission, but through courage, compassion, and the quiet strength that had guided her through a life of hardship. The morning after the incident with the runaway horse, the ranch was unusually quiet. Even the animals seemed to sense the change, moving with a calmness that mirrored the shift in the human hearts on the property. The woman, who had returned to her humble corner in the barn, sensed the weight of expectation in the air. But it was not fear that filled her chest. It was something rarer: anticipation. She had faced countless rejections in her life, but today felt different. The rancher approached her first, his expression measured, yet softened in a way she had never seen. The authority that had once been absolute now carried a tinge of respect, even admiration. "You handled yourself yesterday. And not only that," he began, his voice firm but less harsh than usual. "You protected my daughter, saved the horse, and did so without hesitation. That requires courage, skill, and a sense of responsibility I cannot ignore." The woman's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of acknowledgement. She had spent her life invisible, dismissed at every turn, surviving on scraps and fleeting kindness. Hearing these words from a man of wealth and authority, someone who had the power to cast her away at any moment, felt surreal. "Thank you, sir," she murmured softly. "I did what I could. Only that." Her voice carried humility, but beneath it, a spark of pride glimmered. She had acted out of instinct and compassion, and now, finally, those qualities were being recognized. The rancher's gaze softened further as he looked at her, a subtle shift that spoke volumes. Perhaps I misjudged you before. It is clear, now that your presence here is valuable, not just for the chores you perform, but for the character you display. You have integrity, patience, and a care that this place and my daughter benefit from. The woman bowed her head slightly, acknowledging his words with gratitude, yet a part of her wondered if this acceptance was conditional, if one misstep could erase the fragile trust she had earned. She did not voice her concern, choosing instead to absorb the rare gift of recognition. Later that afternoon, the young girl ran to her side, her face alight with joy and relief. "Mama!" she exclaimed, throwing her small arms around the woman. The word struck the woman like a bolt of warmth. She froze for a heartbeat, stunned by its weight and its sincerity. The girl's trust, her innocence, and her pure affection imbued the word with a power the woman had never experienced. For the first time in her life, she was called something more than a wanderer, a beggar, or a shadow at the edge of society. She was called Mama. Tears welled in the woman's eyes as she knelt to embrace the girl fully, feeling a surge of love and protection she had long thought impossible for herself. It was a moment that transcended words, a bond solidified by trust, courage, and shared experience. The rancher, observing the scene from a distance, felt a shift within himself as well. He had always believed in control, in rules and boundaries, but now he recognized that kindness and character could bridge gaps that wealth and status could not. The woman had earned her place, not through entitlement, but through quiet courage and unwavering compassion. From that day forward, the woman's life changed irrevocably. No longer hidden in the shadows, she was acknowledged, accepted, and most importantly, loved. The barn corner that had once been her only refuge became a symbol of survival transformed into belonging, and the word "mama" echoed in her heart long after it left the girl's lips. At last, she understood what she had been searching for, all along. Not just shelter or food, but a place to call home and a family to call her own. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch settled into a gentle rhythm that embraced the woman as one of its own. No longer hidden in a shadowed corner, she now moved freely throughout the property, her presence welcomed and even sought after. The young girl was never far from her side, chattering endlessly about animals, chores, and the small adventures of the day. Their bond had deepened beyond simple gratitude. It was a connection built on trust, shared experiences, and a love that needed no words to be understood. The rancher, once stern and unyielding, had softened as well. He observed quietly, as the woman guided his daughter in tending the animals, teaching her patience, and instilling values that extended beyond wealth or status. While his protective nature remained, it was tempered by respect for her strength and wisdom. He saw in her a character forged through hardship, a resilience that enriched the household in ways he had never imagined. One evening, as the sun painted the fields in hues of amber and gold, the woman and the girl sat together on the porch steps, the air filled with the sounds of horses grazing and the distant murmur of the river. The girl leaned against her, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "I'm glad you're here, Mama," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. The woman's heart swelled at the word, a single syllable carrying years of longing, fear, and finally, fulfillment. She stroked the girl's hair gently, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "And I'm glad to be here too," she replied, her voice steady but tender. "I've never had a family like this before." That night, as they walked back toward the barn, the woman felt the true weight of what had changed. The barn corner that had once offered only shelter and solitude now symbolized survival transformed into belonging. She had come to the ranch seeking scraps and a place to rest, yet she had found so much more: acceptance, purpose, and the profound, unconditional love of a child who had chosen her without hesitation. The rancher approached quietly, watching, the two together. He nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. In that moment, he recognized that his household had grown richer, not through wealth, but through the quiet acts of courage, kindness, and love that the woman had brought into their lives. The barriers he had once erected between them, of class, suspicion, and pride, had been softened by the undeniable truth of her worth. From then on, life at the ranch was transformed. The woman no longer feared rejection or displacement. She had a role, a family, and a place where she belonged. The young girl thrived under her guidance and companionship, learning lessons not only of chores and animals, but of resilience, empathy, and love. And the woman, who had wandered through life as an unseen shadow, finally knew the warmth of home. The word "mama" became a daily refrain, a reminder of the bond that had grown quietly yet powerfully between them. It echoed through the barn, the fields, and the house, symbolizing a family formed not by birthright or wealth, but by trust, courage, and the transformative power of compassion. In the end, the woman realized that her journey, though harsh and lonely at times, had led her precisely where she needed to be. From a life of wandering and survival, she had discovered connection, belonging, and love, the very things she had long thought out of reach. And as the sun set over the golden fields, casting its final light across the ranch, she held the girl close, feeling the warmth of a family she had never dared to dream of, finally complete.